In Chapter 5 of the Book of Boba Fett, Din Djarin reveals that he has broken his commitment to the Mandalorian way, admitting that he has removed his helmet and shown his face. And upon making this revelation, the armorer declares that Din Djarin is a Mandalorian no more. If this ruling is to be taken seriously, that means that the Mandalorian's armor no longer belongs to him, and it also makes his rightful ownership of the Darksaber a complicated ordeal for the armorer and her only surviving companion at this point, Paz Vizsla, who would prefer that the legendary weapon be in the hands of one of their own kind. It is interesting then that following her declaration that Din is no longer a Mandalorian, that the armorer allows the outcast to walk away without so much as a mention of his armor or the sword which she herself appeared fully capable of winning at that point in Din Djarin's training. And so with all of that in mind, our next question becomes, is the Mandalorian really not a Mandalorian anymore? There are two angles from which we can evaluate this question. The first pertains to the Darksaber, and the second delves into Mandalorian history just before the takeover of the Galactic Empire. The Darksaber is a symbol of power for the Mandalorian people. I have some other videos on its history and how it has changed hands over time if you guys would like to go check them out, but essentially, whoever wins the Darksaber is the rightful ruler of Mandalore. And Din Djarin did win it. He defeated Moff Gideon and then defended his title, beating Paz Vizsla in the Book of Boba Fett. So his ownership of the weapon is legitimate. And that complicates things for the armorer. How can she tell Din he is not a Mandalorian when he holds the keys to their world? Sure, according to her, Mandalorians cannot remove their helmets in front of others, so going by that set of values, Din could be banned from their group. But at the end of the day, she can say that as many times as she wants. The reality still remains that Din holds the Darksaber. So until she or someone else challenges him for it, he is the ruler of Mandalore. But the second and more interesting part of this conversation is the fact that there are other Mandalorians out there who do not abide by the armorer's rules. And so just because Din is not a part of that particular group of Mandalorians doesn't mean he can't be a Mandalorian at all. In fact, based on the implications of the story to this point, the Mandalorian sect that Din Djarin has been a part of were actually a radical separatist group during the Clone Wars who rose up to challenge Mandalore's leadership and eventually joined Darth Maul. Bo-Katan's clan, known as the Night Owls, were a part of this group until Maul's takeover. At that point, they split from the radical group known as the Death Watch and returned to what most people would consider the good side. And since the Night Owls are still out there, as we saw in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, it would likely be pretty easy for Din Djarin to simply side with them. Or he can go find Sabine Wren and join her, or he can simply roll with Grogu. Anything can really happen at this point because the Mandalorians are so scattered and there are so few of them left overall that it doesn't really matter what the armorer or anyone else says. I know that's sort of a bland way to look at the situation, but it's kind of the vibe I think you get in that episode of the Book of Boba Fett. The armorer says you are a Mandalorian no more, and at first you're like, oh wow, what does that mean? And then Din just carries on with his business as usual, and it's like, oh wait, who even cares? And that's due in large part, I believe, to the fact that the Mandalorians don't really have an identity anymore. Their armor is the only thing that separates them from everyone else, and it's also all they really have in common with one another. And this doesn't just apply to what we see in The Mandalorian, when there appears to be hardly any Mandalorians left. This goes all the way back to the Clone Wars and everything in between. There are so many different clans who all seem to follow their own rules and guidelines, so from my point of view, Din Djarin is still just as much a Mandalorian as anyone else, as long as he wants to be. And the removal of his helmet means absolutely nothing because most Mandalorians freely show their faces more often than they have their helmets on anyways. The armorer is actually in the overwhelming minority in this entire situation. Now, is she heeding to the traditional Mandalorian way? Yes, it seems so. But as we have discussed before, cultures change, people change, and so while she may be following an accurate set of rules, those rules seem to be outdated, and it may be time for her to adjust with the times or get left behind. So at the end of the day, is Din Djarin still a Mandalorian? The true answer is maybe, and it may depend largely on what Din himself wants. He is no longer a part of that group of Mandalorians, but he could and most likely will still be considered a Mandalorian in the big picture. He's just going to adapt as he learns more about the history of his people and then ultimately choose what he wants to do and what sort of ideals he wants to follow. But those are my thoughts on Din Djarin's current situation, so I am going to go ahead and wrap this video up here. Let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, remember to drop a thumbs up to support the channel, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, may the Force be with you always.